Is it on? Oh, there we go. We are in business. Can you hear me all right? Great. Well, it's great to be here. My name's Noah. I'm from Eugene, Oregon, where it is much colder than it is in Florida this time of year. So it's nice to be down here enjoying the sunshine, especially since I've been in Antarctica for the past 3 months and just got home a couple of weeks ago, hanging out with these guys, the penguins. So here this afternoon, without too much further ado, I'd just like to show you a few photos of some of the penguins I've seen in Antarctica and a few stories about them. And we'll get started with these guys. So these are called Adélie penguins, Adelie. They're black and white. They come up to your knee, more or less. And take a look at their wings, otherwise known on penguins as flippers. What do you think? Are these penguins able to fly? Can penguins fly? I hear a lot of no's. Are you sure penguins cannot fly? Let's see if this clicker goes. Negative. Can we go to the next slide? So amazingly enough, several years ago, BBC TV sent some people down to Antarctica and they found a colony of Adélie penguins on the Antarctic Peninsula that somehow had managed to learn how to fly. And they got together in these big flocks after the end of the nesting season, and they flew around and they circled over the icebergs, and then they started heading north and they migrated over the Drake Passage to spend the winter in the hot tropical forests of South America in the Amazon instead of hanging out in Antarctica during the cold Antarctic winter. Now, they did release this clip on April the 1st. So it was an April Fool's joke by BBC television. This is fake. Penguins cannot fly, just for the record. They had a team of animators working together to put this clip together, which I think is very funny, but did a pretty good job. Here we go. Here's a world map. And because penguins can't fly, that is part of the reason that we don't have them around here in the Florida Panhandle. Where do you think penguins live? Yeah, I'm seeing some fingers pointing down. You are correct. Penguins are around there in the southern hemisphere. There are no penguins north of the equator, except technically the Galapagos penguin makes it 1 or 2 miles north in a couple of spots. But otherwise, you can see penguins in Antarctica at the bottom of your screen there, that whole white area. There's also penguins, though, in South America, South Africa. Has anyone seen that TV show, Penguin Town? Oh, a couple hands. Okay, if you have not seen this show, go home and Netflix Penguin Town because it is quite entertaining. It's about some African penguins that live in a human town in South Africa, and they walk around town and they make their nests under people's front porches and that kind of thing, but it is very entertaining. Then there's penguins in southern Australia, southern New Zealand, and a bunch of the islands in between. But my favorite penguins are the ones that live all the way down south on the continent of Antarctica. And here it is. If you look at the globe from its bottom with the South Pole right in the middle, this is what it looks like. People I have talked to see different things in the shape of the continent of Antarctica. It's kind of like an ink blot test or staring at the clouds on a sunny day. You can kind of see whatever you want in the outline of this continent, but a lot of people say it looks kind of like a rhinoceros with a big horn sticking out the left. If so, the horn part of the rhino is the Antarctic Peninsula, and there you go. The whole continent is Antarctica, of course. And if you go there on the beaches, this is what you're likely to see. Penguins walking around up and down the beach, They have no fear of people. So this is me crouching down with my phone taking this video. They're just streaming by, coming right up to you. They're often very curious about you. So they'll come up and they'll untie your shoelaces, and they'll come up and they'll sit next to you and just go to sleep and take a nap, or they'll follow along behind you as you walk around, whatever you're up to. They just kind of see you like this alien dropped in from outer space, specially sent to entertain them, as far as I can tell. And they have a lot of energy to burn and free time on their hands during the summer. So penguins are very curious creatures. This one is called an emperor penguin. It's the largest penguin in the world. So emperors come up just about to my chest. They're that tall. And this one is about 1.5 inches away from me at the moment. This was a little bit farther south because emperor penguins nest on the open sea ice around Antarctica in very cold conditions. And they are quite beautiful to look at. They have this orange color on the side of their head and on their throat as well. Here's all the penguins in the world. There are 18 different species of them. We're looking at them here in cartoon format. And as I mentioned, a bunch of them are in other places besides Antarctica. So I'm just gonna black those ones out for now. And let's focus on the 8 that you can potentially see on a trip to the Antarctic Peninsula south of South America. And I'll go through these one by one and show you some of my pictures so you can see what they look like. Starting with this one. This is probably my favorite penguin personally. It's called the chinstrap. And you can easily recognize a chinstrap penguin because they have this black line around their throat. It looks like they're wearing a hat on top of their head that's cinched down tight. Otherwise, they're black and white with kind of a dark brown eye. And then you've got this one called the gentoo penguin. You can recognize a gentoo because they have a reddish orange beak. It kind of looks like they're wearing lipstick or something. And on the side of their head, they have a white spot that looks like they're also wearing headphones or earmuffs on top of their head. So gentoo penguins are also easily recognizable. And then this one I mentioned earlier, the Adélie, they are truly black and white, except maybe for their feet, if you look closely, are a bit pinkish colored, but the rest of them are the classic black and white penguin tuxedo. And then you've got some other ones. So this one is the Magellanic penguin. If you ever go see penguins in a zoo or an aquarium, you are likely to see one that looks like this, either a Magellanic or an African penguin, because they tend to live in hotter areas. And you can see this one is on a sandy beach, so it's not in a cold environment. So they survive better in zoos. But you can tell because they have that extra black stripe around their chest that they're different from the Adélies. Oh my gosh, the macaroni penguin is spectacular. Look at its hairdo and its name. It's not actually named for pasta. Macaroni is an old word for a special type of hat. I don't know if you've ever heard that song, Yankee Doodle Dandy stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. That's the same word as the name of this penguin, but they have these fluffy yellow feathers on their forehead that are just to die for. And then you've got the rockhopper penguin. Penguins cannot fly. We've already established that, but they can hop pretty well. And these rockhoppers will hop all the way up cliff faces to get up to where they nest, even a couple 100 feet up off the beach. So they're pretty hardcore. If you look closely enough, they also have a little bit of yellow just above their eyes, kind of like the macaroni penguin, but a little bit more muted. And then finally, you've got the 2 big ones, the king penguin. You can see these ones in places like South Georgia Island, which is paradise for penguins and seals near Antarctica. They nest in colonies of hundreds of thousands of king penguins, all standing side by side. All those ones in the background, those are all more king penguins behind these ones in front. They are beautiful, as are the emperors and their chicks, which are probably the cutest chicks of any of the penguins and maybe any of the other birds anywhere in the world. They have that characteristic black and white appearance. Okay, so those are the 8 penguins we're dealing with around the Antarctic Peninsula. Remember I was saying how they kind of follow you around sometimes when you're walking down the beach? This is often because young adult penguins who are 2 or 3 years old, they come back to the colony for the first time after they've been out at sea for the first 2+ years of their life without ever touching land during that whole time. They come back and then they just kind of spend the first summer around the colony hanging out with a lot of free time on their hands, and they don't make a nest. They're just observing what else is going on so that in the future they can come back and get a mate and make their own nest. But for the time being, they don't really have a lot to do. So those are the ones, these like teenager penguins that follow you around. And it's true, you could be walking down the beach and turn around and have a group of 50 of these penguins right behind you, shadowing every move you make as you go around wherever you're trying to go. But if you turn around and you approach a penguin and you walk up to it, they do eventually have this bubble of personal space. So if you get within maybe 2 or 3 feet of a penguin, they suddenly start to kind of freak out like, oh my gosh, what's happening? This large animal is coming toward me. What should I do? I'm not familiar with this situation. So sometimes penguins can actually attack. And I'll show you what a penguin attack looks like. That is a penguin attack. So you gotta be a little careful because they can charge. And they actually do have a very sharp beak and they can peck you quite hard. They have extremely strong wings, also called flippers on penguins because they swim so much. Their muscles are very well developed. So when they attack you, they'll peck you, but they also use their flippers and they just whack you as hard as they can with their flippers. And I've been attacked by, this is not me in this video, but I have been attacked by penguins like this once or twice in my time in Antarctica and have the bruises to show for it. The first time I ever went to Antarctica was right after I graduated from college. I went south to join a penguin research study in the Ross Sea area, which is south of New Zealand, through the US Antarctic program as a scientist. And I got there by getting on this US Air Force cargo jet, which flew over the ocean and then landed on the ice runway near McMurdo Station on the frozen surface of the ocean. So it is so cold that the ocean itself freezes more than 10 feet thick over the winter in this area. And you can land a cargo jet on top of it and use it as a runway. So that's what they do. And we came to a stop and everyone started getting off and walking around. And you look around and you're on top of the frozen ocean. All you can see in any direction is just white on the ground and the sky and a few mountains in the distance. And that was it. There weren't any penguins in that area. McMurdo Station was a 45-minute drive away from the ice runway. And it was just like landing on another planet out there. And to get to the station, we then boarded these vehicles. The one on the left is a legend in Antarctica. His name is Ivan the Terra Bus, and he's been in operation since at least the 1970s, as far as I know. And then we got some other vehicles to take us around too. This one's name is Gretel, as you can see on the front. And we drove around over the frozen ocean. It was pretty cool, leaving these tracks in the distance. That mountain behind us is actually an active volcano called Mount Erebus. It has a plume of steam coming out the top almost all the time, and it is the southernmost active volcano anywhere in the world. As long as the steam is coming out the top, people are pretty comfortable about living near this active volcano because it's kind of like as long as it's talking to us, we're still on good terms. But it's when it starts to go quiet that people start to worry a little bit more. And the steam kept coming out the whole time I was there, so I wasn't too worried. McMurdo Station is an odd place. I wasn't going to spend very much time here, just about a week getting set up before I shipped out to my field camp with the penguins. But I did get to experience it. It is quite large. It's the largest human settlement anywhere in Antarctica. There are about 2,000 people in McMurdo Station during the summer months these days, and a few hundred of those over winter when it's dark 24 hours a day before the following summer. It looks kind of messy. I mean, it looks like a big mining camp in Nevada or something. There's just big tanks and industrial equipment and dusty roads. And it wasn't the most beautiful place to spend some time, but there's a lot of interesting science that goes on there. While I was staying at McMurdo Station, my roommate was working on something called a neutrino particle from outer space. And because Antarctica is white and you can put weather balloons up in the air, and there was this whole process of how they could actually study outer space, how appropriate in a planetarium in Antarctica. So you never know who you're going to meet down there. I think some people have too much free time on their hands, though. So this was stenciled on the door of my room when I arrived. You melted my ice, I break it you face. So I didn't melt his ice. And I spent the first couple days when I was there in what they call snow school, or happy campers class, which is a survival training exercise that takes 2 days for anyone who's going to go to the outer field camps in Antarctica, just to teach you a few skills in case everything goes wrong and you have to survive on your own for a while before they can send someone out to rescue you. So we learned a bunch of stuff about like drilling holes through the ice on top of the ocean to measure how thick the ice is, for things like, can you drive a car across it? Can you land a plane on it? Can you even walk across the ice? We also built this little camp and then slept in the camp somewhat cold overnight, having dug ourselves in as if we were in like a helicopter accident or something and had to wait to be rescued. While all the instructors of our camp, I noticed, went off and slept in a nice heated hut nearby. I learned how to quarry snow blocks, which was really cool. So the snow in Antarctica is very dry and compacted by the wind, but also lightweight, which makes it perfect for carving into whatever shape you want to carve it into. So here we are with the regular saw, like you would use to saw a tree trunk, except I'm sawing the snow into bricks, and then you can use those bricks to build anything you want. You can build a wall to shelter yourself from the wind. You can build a whole igloo, although I learned that actually takes a huge amount of effort and is good if you have multiple people to do it. Or, as I did, you can just dig a hole in the ground that's about the size and shape of a grave that you can lie down inside, and then cover the top of it with snow blocks to build a roof, and then stuff your sleeping bag down inside the hole, and then stuff yourself inside your sleeping bag, and then try to get some sleep. And it was actually a pretty comfortable way to spend a night. It doesn't get dark in the summer, so it was light throughout the wee hours, but I slept pretty well during my snow coffin exercise in Happy Cappers class. But I only spent so long around there because, again, the object was to get out and see the penguins. So then I jumped on a helicopter. I'd never been on a helicopter in my life before at this point, and so I was pretty excited to join my 2 science compatriots, who you can see there next to me, as we flew out to our camp for the next couple of months. And we were flying over terrain like this, just looking down into the crevasses and glaciated areas on the middle of Ross Island. And then finally, about 70 miles away from McMurdo Station, touched down and got dropped off, and the helicopter left us alone at our camp, where the 3 of us would spend the next 3 months without seeing another human being during that whole time, only in touch by radio and the extremely fast satellite internet connection that we had from our tents. And right around the back of the camp was the penguin colony. So the setup was, there was this little hut in the middle that was about 9 by 15 feet. So it was pretty small, just big enough to have a propane stove in there and some solar panels to have electricity. And then the 3 of us would sleep at night in these canvas tents, so we wouldn't want to just kill each other by being on each other's nerves too much at the end of the season. My tent was the one in the middle, just to the right of the hut there. It's a canvas tent with multiple layers that's really rocked down and tied down solidly so it doesn't blow away when the winds spring up. Unheated. There was no shower. There was no bath for the whole summer. I didn't have any way to wash my clothing or do laundry. There was no fresh food for the whole summer, so nothing that's in your refrigerator at home, basically. Although we did have an unlimited supply, it seemed, of ice cream, which was pretty cool because we just kept it outside in the snow and it never melted. So we had as much ice cream as we could handle and frozen vegetables. That's pretty much what we survived on. You can see in the background behind the rightmost tent, there's a bit of a snowy pass between two rocky hills. And if you go down there and you take a right, you come out into this valley, which is full of 300,000 nesting Adélie penguins. 300,000 penguins. Do you know what 300,000 penguins sounds like when they're all screaming at the top of their lungs? Well, I can kind of do an imitation for you of what one penguin sounds like, and then you're just going to have to extrapolate in your brain. But one Adélie penguin kind of sounds like it's going. Imagine a whole city full of penguins doing that all at the same time. It gets pretty loud. It's like a stadium of sports fans or something. Also, the smell. Oh my gosh, the smell. They're all going to the bathroom in the same areas year after year, and it builds up. So penguin poop is called guano, and there was a lot of guano around on the ground. And I got to appreciate the very cold days versus the slightly warmer days when the guano would start to thaw out and you would get hit with the full force of the smell of it. It was pretty neat for me to be able to see the whole nesting season, starting at the beginning of the summer when the penguins are making their nest. This one is a Gentoo. You can see the red beak and the white earmuffs, remember? And it's built its nest out of rocks. Penguins don't nest on the ice or the snow, except for the emperor penguin. The rest of them have to find a rocky spot and then gather about 1,000 rocks and stack them up to make their nest like this, which is a lot of work for a penguin because, well, they don't have hands. So to gather rocks, they have to walk around and use their beak and pick up a rock one at a time, carry it back to its nest, put it down, go off, find another one, pick it up, carry it back to its nest, put it down. That takes them a couple of weeks of work just to build this nest. Meanwhile, every time they drop a rock off and then they go wandering off to find another one, their neighbor in the next nest over turns around and steals that rock and puts it into its own nest. So there's this constant rock stealing happening everywhere you look. Every time a penguin turns its back, somehow they all end up with the same number of rocks, more or less, by the time the nesting season really kicks in and they start laying their eggs, which look like this. See the egg right up underneath that penguin's belly, just between its feet? There is probably a second egg just behind it that you can't see, farther back between its legs. They almost always have 2 eggs per nest, and they incubate them one in front of the other. When they're sitting on their eggs, they keep them really hot. So they have a what's called a brood patch where they lose their feathers on their belly, and it's bare skin that gets engorged with blood vessels, and they keep that right on top of the egg. And so the eggs are kept at a constant temperature of just about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, even when it's -20 outside the nest. They sit on their eggs for about a month, and then this happens. One day, they hatch into the cutest thing you've ever seen. This is a 2-day-old Gentoo penguin chick. ×2. Actually, there's 2 chicks. The one sticking its head up, and then there's another one with its head tucked up underneath its parent there on the right. Could be the mom, could be their dad. Hard to tell the difference between male and female penguins. On average, the male is slightly larger, but you can't really tell most of the time. And they switch off, and those chicks start to grow. Can you see the little white thing on the top of the tip of the beaks of the chicks? There's a white spot there. that's not on the beak of the parent, which is coming down from the top. Those white spots are called an egg tooth. It's not a real type of tooth, but it's a little bump that forms on the beaks of young birds so that when they start hatching, they use that spot to break their way out of the shell. And it takes a long time for a baby penguin to hatch. It actually takes them usually more than 24 hours before they come all the way out of the shell. So what they do first is they make a little hole from the inside. They start tapping with that egg tooth inside out. And as soon as there's a little hole, from inside the egg, the chick starts peeping. So when you hear a sound like a peep, 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 you know that there's a penguin hatching somewhere nearby, and you can start looking around. And the adults will also start talking back to their chicks. So they make quiet sounds back and forth as well, I guess, to encourage them on all this hard work of hatching out of the eggshell. And then the parents have to start going back and forth out to sea and swim far offshore to gather some fish to bring back to feed their chicks, which are incessantly hungry, and they get hungrier and hungrier as they get older and bigger. So this is a bunch of Adélie penguins lining up on a diving board and going off into the ocean where they're going to swim like 20, 25 miles offshore to a spot where they can go get some fish to eat and then bring it back and very tenderly feed their chicks. Here they are when they're swimming in open water. You can see the one in the back has got its beak open. It's taking a nice big breath of air. Remember, penguins are a type of bird. They are not a fish. They are not a mammal. They are a bird because they lay eggs and they have feathers. So they need to breathe air as well. And so when they're swimming along, they occasionally jump out of the water, just like a seal or a dolphin. In fact, this behavior is called porpoising. And then when they come back to feed their chicks, this is how they do it. They just barf it up right into their chick's mouth. Imagine if your mom and dad fed you lunch like this every day, you might be a little bit less hungry, but this is how penguins do it. And the chicks try to suck down every last drop that they can get until the parent turns around and goes back out to find some more. They grow pretty fast. These chicks of the Adélie penguin are probably only about a month old, and they're already half the size of their parent. And as they start to get a little larger, they're covered with these fuzzy, downy feathers that help keep them warm. And I don't know, I think as the chicks get bigger, they get somewhat less cute and start maybe looking more like baby dinosaurs or something. They look sort of strange for a while, kind of an awkward adolescent period. And then at some point during that period, when they're maybe 3/4 the size of their parents, the parents say, all right, enough is enough. I have fed you all that I can stand. And they turn around and they swim out to sea and they don't come back. So now these penguin chicks are standing around. You can see they are very well fed at this point. Their bellies are packed. You can see them just sticking out because they're so full of food. So they wait around and they wait for themselves to digest all of that fish and grow a little bit more. And then one day, toward the end of the Antarctic summer, usually sometime in February or March, because the seasons are flipped down there, those chicks will lose their downy feathers over the course of a few days and then go into the ocean all by themselves with nobody showing them how to do it and swim out to sea. And then they spend the first 2 years of their life or so mostly swimming in the ocean without coming out on land or on icebergs or anything like that. They are just creatures of the water more than they are of the land. But before we could allow any of that to happen, remember, I was down there as a scientist and we had to tag some of these young penguin chicks as part of our research project to track them over time and figure out if they were coming back year after year and other information like that. So we had this penguin corral, we called it, that we would just put around a group of baby penguins and then jump inside. And then we had to do it pretty fast because we were breaking down our camp at the end of the season. You would pick up a baby penguin in one hand, put a tag on its wing, toss it outside the corral, pick up another one, put a tag on it, toss it outside, and very quickly go through them all until they were all outside the fence, and then break it down and go off in the distance and find another penguin chick creche, is what a group of young penguins is called, and corral them and keep going. And after about an hour, we had tagged 1,000 baby penguins this way, which was pretty solid work. Here's what the tags look like. They're just little pieces of metal, like a bracelet you might wear, that the penguins wear right around the base of their wings. And they stay on for the rest of their life. They're very lightweight. They don't interfere with them swimming around. And you can see they've got a 5-digit number on there. So this one is penguin number 47501. And if 47501 ever makes it back to the colony in the future, you can read that tag and know exactly which penguin it is and know its whole history. And so from these tagging studies, we've learned things like, how long do penguins live? Turns out they live 15 to 20 years on average would be a good old age for one of these penguins. Do they come back to the same nest year after year? Yeah, pretty much they do. It's very rare that a penguin will nest in one colony one year and then go to a different colony the next year. That almost never happens. And they usually have the same mate year after year. Although it's sort of on a sliding scale. There are divorces in the penguin world, but for the most part, they're pretty monogamous. And they are just as soft as they look. When you pick up a penguin chick like this, those downy feathers are like a little beanie baby or a stuffed animal or something. You just want to like rub them all over yourself and bathe in their softness. But remember, their stomach is so packed full of fish that when you pick them up, any kind of extra pressure on there usually causes them to just poop everywhere. So we got covered in penguin poo by the end of the day, but it was still pretty fun doing this tagging study. Here's my tent that I lived in that summer. I spent 3 months sleeping in this tent every single night. I would crawl in there, and there's my sleeping bag on the right and all my extra clothes flung around on the left. The first night I slept in there, I was used to camping in warmer places, and I took all my layers off so that I could change to new layers. And I got so cold, I just laid in my sleeping bag and shivered for about 45 minutes before I got warm again. So thereafter, for the rest of the summer, I would come in from a day in the penguin colony, and I'd take my boots off and my outer jacket off, and I just leave all of my other clothes on and crawl into my sleeping bag that way. And it was great. I stayed warm and dry and comfortable. The only downside of that was we didn't really have any way to do laundry. So I only had a certain supply of clean underlayers. So I had to kind of remember like when I should rotate them. And at one point I realized it had been about 2 weeks since I got down to layer number 1. That was kind of a low point during the season and a personal record, I might add. But it could get kind of windy sometimes. So here's what it's like when the wind is blowing more than 100 miles an hour. And it kept this up without gusting below 100 for 48 straight hours at one point. It's hard to express what it's like to be in wind that's that strong. First of all, it's hard. You can't talk. You can't hear anything. It's hard to see anything because the wind is just like blowing your eyeballs around. It's hard to stand up even, so you almost have to crawl around on all fours on the ground to get from one place to the next. I'm taking this video, and then the other 2 people there are my coworkers struggling to get from a tent back to the hut where we were hunkered down trying to wait out this windstorm while big rocks were being blown through the air and embedding themselves in the walls of the hut. It was pretty hectic there for a couple of days while we had this crazy windstorm blow through. But this is just part of life in Antarctica. You get extreme weather sometimes, and it is especially windy, especially around the continental fringes of the continent. Oh, and this was our bathroom. I thought I would show you. It's just a bucket, very simple. You go in the bucket, and then when it fills up, you put the lid on and you put it out back so it freezes and it's doesn't smell up everything. But at the end of the season, we had to evacuate everything from our camp because you can't just leave stuff there because it will never rot and it would be there forever. And so we had about 10 of these human waste buckets piled up. And the only way to get them back to McMurdo Station when we got picked up by the helicopter was to wedge them all in the cockpit right around the pilot, which he was super excited about, as you can imagine, for the flight homeward. I went through a bit of a plumage transformation myself while I was in this field camp. So this was day one. Here I was, 22 years old. I had just graduated from college, on my way to Antarctica at the beginning of the summer, totally fresh and clean shaven and excited about the adventures ahead. By halfway through that summer, I was starting to look and feel like this grizzled Antarctic explorer, like you would see in those old black and white photos of all those adventurers that went to Antarctica about 100 years ago. And then by the end of the summer, I mean, it was out of control. I was starting to become unrecognizable with this beard on my face. I wasn't shaving. So I had like bits of frozen food stuck in there all the time that I couldn't get out. And it was interesting. I'd never grown a beard like this before. I went home and my mom picked me up from the airport when I got back home, and she saw me in the arrivals area. And then she walked up to me very slowly and she looked in my eyes and she went, "Noah, is that you?" So there you go. My own mother didn't even recognize me after my first season in Antarctica. And then since that experience, I've gone back south and I've become a tour guide for tourist expeditions to Antarctica. I also go down on research trips as a scientist, just depending on the season. This past 3 months, I was down there as a tour guide for a couple months, and then I was counting penguins for a nonprofit science group for the past month or so. I wanted to show you some photos of emperor penguins because these ones are quite special. And I did take a special trip to see them just a couple of years back. Remember, these are the really tall ones, so they come up to my chest or so. To get to where the emperor penguins live, this time, instead of taking a cargo jet, I got on this ship, which is called an icebreaker. It is very strong and powerful, and so it can plow through about 6 feet of solid ice on the surface of the ocean, as we're doing here. And I'm taking this video from a helicopter that's circling around and flying around the ship while it's moving. You can see there's a second helicopter there below us and a helicopter landing pad on the back of the ship, so we could actually take off and land on board while the ship was still moving, which was pretty fun. We did this for about 2 days through the Weddell Sea on the east side of the Antarctic Peninsula before we got in position pretty close to the emperor penguin colony, and then flew off the deck one last time and landed on the ice about 1 kilometer out from where the penguins were, and then walked that last kilometer so we wouldn't disturb them with all this heavy equipment. And there they were. The emperor chicks are exquisitely cute. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the movie Happy Feet, but to me, I mean, they just look like Mumble from Happy Feet. Maybe the eyes are a little bit different, but they got it pretty good, I think. This is pretty true to life. That whole movie, in fact, if you've seen it, is, I mean, aside from all the singing and dancing that the penguins are doing, quite scientifically accurate. They're all representing real species of penguins, and they used actual backdrops from the Antarctic Peninsula for that movie. And so I thought they did a pretty good job with it. But it was amazing to see the emperor penguins in real life. They gather together in these big colonies on the ice, and they huddle shoulder to shoulder to keep themselves warm. They endure the coldest conditions of any bird on Earth, because it takes them a long time between when they lay an egg and the chick becomes independent. If you back it up, they have to lay the egg in midwinter in the coldest part of the world when it's dark 24 hours a day. The female lays the egg, and then she right away gives it to the male and runs off to go out in the ocean and try to eat some fish. and just leaves all the male penguins alone in the colony, where they are the ones that incubate the eggs for up to about 2 months or so, huddling together without eating anything. And then the females, the moms, come back and they start switching off. And by the time we arrived, it was almost Christmas time. That was near the end of the emperor penguin's nesting season. So they had chicks that were growing up and already fairly large like this. They're not totally balanced yet. So the chick on the left has an itch on its face and it's going to try to scratch itself with its foot, but couldn't quite reach, maybe because their belly is pretty stuffed full of fish as well. So they'll work it out one of these days. And then recently, I did my master's degree studying chinstrap penguins in Antarctica. So I was living in New York for the past couple of years on Long Island, going to a university called Stony Brook in a research lab, just so that I could spend my field work time in Antarctica studying these chinstraps. And the chinstraps, again, they're the ones with that nice line around the throat. They lay 2 eggs. They raise their 2 chicks. You can see more chinstraps there in the distance, but look at how far this penguin is from the ocean. It has had to climb from the water all the way up this rocky hillside to a height of about 500 feet above sea level to where it makes its nest. Now that seems crazy, because why don't they just make their nest down lower next to the ocean? Well, for a chinstrap, it's because in the places they nest, it is very snowy in the winter, and the first places where the snow melts in the spring, when the nesting season starts, are the tops of the rocky ridges. So they climb up there and they make their nest as soon as they can so that they can get started. And then by the end of the summer, all of the snow is melted off and they're finishing up their nest still up on top of the ridge, while the snow has also melted off on the beaches down below them. So there is a reason to their madness. I went down this time on this ship, which took us from Argentina south across what's called the Drake Passage, about 600 miles to the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. And it was kind of rough landing on some of these beaches where the chinstrap colonies were. That water is about 0 degrees. And we got kind of wet and cold going to and from the beaches in the surf, getting in and out of these inflatable Zodiac boats that were taking us to shore so that we could access the penguin colonies. But once we got on land, it was amazing. This is what it looks like from the air. We were using some drones, which we put up in the sky with a camera attached to look down, so you could see all of the areas in here that are kind of lighter pinkish white color, like that blob in the foreground, and then the big area down below. Those are all covered with nesting chinstrap penguins. If you look closely, you can see me walking right along the edge in the middle there as well for a sense of scale. And then if you get a little bit closer from the air, you can actually start seeing the individual penguins equally spaced, each nest within pecking distance of its nearest neighbor at a constant density. And the black and white ones are the chinstraps. If you look carefully, you can see there's some fuzzy gray blobs in there as well. Those are all the chicks that are just a couple of weeks old at this point. They nest in these huge colonies. There can be thousands and thousands of chinstrap penguins all nesting side by side in this one noisy metropolis. And my job when I went down there was to count them. Literally one by one, we get up on a rock and kind of get your bearings and then start from one end of the colony and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we had some tricks up our sleeve to make sure we didn't lose track or count a penguin twice, but it takes a while to go through a penguin colony and count them all. How many do you think there are in this picture? Any ideas? What do you think? 3,050 or so. Okay, what do you think? 300,000. Okay. Any other guesses? Yeah, what do you think? 500. Well, you guys are in the right ballpark. I counted these penguins, and I can tell you there are just about 1,000, maybe a little more than 1,000 penguins in this picture. So you can count about 1,000 penguin nests per hour if you're really on top of your game, but often the colonies are much larger than that. So we'd have to spend multiple days on land so that we could get the whole count done. So this means that we had to set up camp once again. We had these tents. We set up on shore and we slept on shore in these tents and then got up the next morning and kept counting. But in this particular case, we were camping pretty close, you can see, to the ocean there on the right. And on the beaches of Antarctica, besides penguins, there are also various types of seals running around. See that seal? That is a young elephant seal. And the thing about elephant seals is they are what's called thigmotactic, which means they really like to snuggle. They like to cuddle each other. Normally, they're in a group on shore of a whole pile of seals, all shoulder to shoulder, kind of to keep each other warm and keep each other company. But this one was a lonely one, and it saw our tents and was like, yes, someone to snuggle with. So it came up the beach at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and we had to get out and try to fend off this snuggle-worthy elephant seal, which was very cute with those big eyes. But I mean, I can tell you when an elephant seal finds your gear pile and you come back and it's snuggling all your backpacks, after it's been on top of that gear for several hours, this molting elephant seal, your gear is never quite going to smell the same after that. Besides the elephant seals, there's a few other seals and other critters you might see while you're in Antarctica. So here at the end, I thought I'd just show you some of the other wildlife besides the penguins you might see while you're down there. This one is called a Weddell seal. It's another friendly one. The elephant seals and the Weddell seals, they don't eat penguins or anything like that. They just go out and they swim around and they dive pretty deep under the ocean and they catch krill and fish and other small things like that. Then you've got the Antarctic fur seal. These guys are a little friskier on shore. They're more like a dog or something, and they can sit up on top of their flippers and they can run across the beach almost as fast as a human can. And sometimes they're a little aggressive because they maintain territories. So you have to steer a little bit more clear of the fur seals on shore. There's also whales in Antarctica. You can see lots of humpback whales swimming around the ocean, all the places that we go down there. And here, this was just a couple of weeks ago, I filmed these fin whales coming up next to our ship. The fin whale is almost as big as a blue whale. So that is almost the biggest animal on planet Earth. There's a few other birds around as well. You might see some Antarctic cormorants. See, this one's got a little chick inside its nest, sticking its head up, waiting to be fed. And Antarctic terns, they have a nice red beak and red legs. You can also see the albatross. When you're on board the ship, especially going over the ocean to get to Antarctica, you see these flying around your ship, and they have the largest wingspan of any bird in the world. So the wandering albatross from wingtip to wingtip is about 11 feet wide. Me, I'm just under 6 feet. So stack another one of me on top of me, and that's the wingspan of a wandering albatross. Pretty amazing to see those birds up close. Finally, you've got some various petrels and then the predators. So snow petrels are very nice, but the larger petrels, the giant petrels, will scavenge dead animals on the beaches. And this one, the South Polar skua, is the main predator of penguin eggs and chicks in the colony. So they'll fly around, and skuas are very clever. They work in pairs. One will come in from the back of a penguin nest and distract the parent penguin. And then the other one will come in from the front and try to steal the egg out from underneath while the penguin is distracted. However, the penguins fight back. Remember, they can attack as well. and they can whack a skua upside the head pretty well and send it flying. So it's not as lopsided of a battle as you might think. The other seals I showed earlier were friendly, but this one is not. This one is called a leopard seal, and it is the top seal predator in the South. Leopard seals will attack penguins. They will attack and eat other seals as well. And a good way to identify a leopard seal is on the side of its face. It always kind of looks like it's smiling. This evil grin that leopard seals have as they're contemplating their next penguin attack on the horizon. So penguins are not afraid of us or other predators on land, but once they get in the water, they are much more circumspect because besides even leopard seals, there are also killer whales, also called orcas. You can say either one, swimming around Antarctica. They're pretty common in the icy waters around the continent down there, and you see them from time to time, usually in small pods like this. And so here you go. Here's a group of killer whales. See the fins sticking out, and oh, what's that? A penguin. Jumped into our boat while it was being chased by killer whales. The killer whales knew that the penguin was in the boat, so they started following along like, we know you're in there. But they're not going to attack the boat itself. That's a bit too much for a killer whale to take on. So what do you do now? You've got a penguin in your boat. What should you do with the penguin? Well, here is a penguin in a boat. And we're like taking pictures of it, and it's posing and showing off all its best angles while it's sitting proudly on the nose of our Zodiac. Very glad that it's just escaped from the leopard seal that was trying to attack it in the water. And then I saw there's these other penguins on top of an iceberg nearby, and was like, well, maybe we can take it over there and it will like go rejoin its friends on top of the iceberg. I didn't know how this was going to work out. I hadn't tried this particular maneuver before. So we nosed in and got closer and closer to the iceberg, and there he goes. The penguin totally understood what we were doing, and he got off and went up to rejoin his friends. So if you ever have a penguin jump into your boat, all you got to do is find a group of other penguins on top of an iceberg nearby and give it a little taxi ride over so that it can safely rejoin its friends. And with that, I would like to open it up to any questions at all that you might have about penguins or anything else. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, that is a very good question. How many bird species are there in all of Antarctica? Well, I think at this point, I personally have been to Antarctica 35 times. And in the total of all those trips, I have seen 28 species of birds in Antarctica. So that's about how many there are. There might be one or two more that occur rarely, but there are not very many. There's about 20 to 30. Yeah. Oh, I like this question because this just came up this year. So the question is, can owls live in Antarctica? The answer is no. Owls cannot live in Antarctica. There's nothing really for them to eat there because there's not much on land, especially during the winter. However, a friend of mine was on a boat that was going south from Argentina a couple of months ago, and they got a couple hundred miles down into the Drake Passage across the latitude of 60 degrees, which people kind of consider to be the border of Antarctica. And he went out on deck one day and he looked back, and there was a barn owl flying behind the ship that evidently had, I don't know, been stranded on board or something as the ship was sailing south from Argentina and was just hanging around. And the owl stayed with them for another day until they started seeing icebergs. And at that point, it was probably thinking, oh my gosh, I took the wrong cruise. So I don't know what happened to that owl. Hopefully it found another ship that was going north so it could go back to Argentina. Yeah. Yeah, good question. So the question is, can you use the drones to do the censuses of the penguin colonies? And yes, the answer to that question is yes, you can. And we did, and we were. It's most useful when you're doing a very large penguin colony to do it that way, because once the colony gets above about 10,000 nests or so, it just takes so much time to count them on the ground that it's easier to take a photo from the air and count it on a computer screen, or have an undergrad count it on a computer screen once you get back home. But you lose some things when you do that, because if you're not actually there present on the ground, if you're just looking at a kind of grainy picture on a computer, it's hard to interpret sometimes what you're seeing, if that penguin really has a chick and if it has a nest, or if it's just sort of crouching and maybe taking a rest. And so it can be more accurate when you're actually there in person and able to interpret what you're seeing and able to walk around and get different vantage points. But as part of my master's degree, we used a bunch of drone imagery of the penguin colonies that we had been studying. And then we worked together with a team of computer scientists from Northeastern University who built a AI, artificial intelligence computer algorithm that we came up with a big training set of what penguin nests look like in drone images. And then we taught the AI to count them, and it was remarkably accurate. So that may be kind of the future of some of these seabird censuses, is that you can just pop a drone up in the air if you don't have much time, take some photos, and then run an AI on it and get a really quick, rapid count of how many nesting birds there are in that colony. Oh, why couldn't we do our laundry in our camp? Well, I mean, when I say we couldn't do our laundry, I mean we didn't have a washing machine, and the ocean itself was completely frozen. And I just didn't really have the motivation to do it that often in the sort of sink contraption that we had. To get any water, we had to melt snow in a pot on top of our stove. I did do some scrubbing once in a while, but I mean, to me, that's just not quite the same as running it through a washing machine when you're back home. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. So we have a stuffed animal penguin at home that is gray, and it's got a black hood, and it's got some orange curves on its neck back behind. Well, if it has any orange color around its neck, the only two penguins that might be are the king penguin and the emperor penguin. And I have a feeling it's more likely to be an emperor penguin, because those ones are very popular, especially among stuffed animals. So that would be my guess, is that it's an emperor. Yeah, go ahead. Ooh, well, how long have penguins been on Earth? This is a scientific and somewhat philosophical question, because they have been sort of evolving continuously over time. But penguins in recognizable penguin form have probably been around for several million years, always in the southern hemisphere. There are penguin fossils of other species that we don't have around today, including some giant penguins that were up to 6 feet tall, with beaks that were more than a foot long and weighed about 250 pounds, that lived in what is now the Antarctic Peninsula, also in New Zealand. And there were even giant penguins in what is now the Atacama Desert of Peru, of all places. So they have been around for quite a while. They've seen a thing or two in their evolutionary history, and hopefully we'll have them for another few million years as well. Yeah. Yeah, are penguin populations declining or growing, or what? Well, as part of my research on chinstrap penguins, that's what I was trying to figure out for chinstrap specifically, because we didn't even have a good idea of how many of them were out there and if there are more or fewer than there used to be. The historical data is a bit patchy because these places are so remote. One island that I visited on that trip, no one had ever set foot on before in history. We were the first ones ever. There are still major new discoveries to be made in Antarctica, which kind of blows me away, actually, that there are places on Earth that are still that remote. But if you want to know how penguins are doing, the short answer is they're all doing different things. There's 18 different kinds of penguins in the world. Some are going up, some are going down, some are going sideways. The chinstrap penguins that I was studying seem to be declining on the Western Antarctic Peninsula. There were fewer than half as many in our survey than there were in a similar survey in 1970. So that's actually quite a big decline in just a couple of penguin generations. And then the question is, well, why? There's several possible reasons. It could be that there's less sea ice than there used to be in that part of the world because climate change is especially concentrated on the Western Antarctic Peninsula. It could be because krill fishing has increased in the area and they're fishing for the same krill that the penguins are eating. It could be because of whale populations that are increasing after whales were all hunted 100 years ago. And now the whales are coming back and they're eating the same krill that the penguins are eating as well. So these things are all kind of interacting with each other. My project was not so much about pinning down the exact cause as just trying to figure out what the trends might be. But I think penguins are going to be around for a while. They're fairly adaptable animals. The ones that I was studying are ranked by the IUCN as least concern. So not even remotely close to being endangered. There are still millions and millions of them around. So I think these fluctuations speak more to larger changes that are happening in the whole ecosystem than maybe the fate of that one penguin itself. Yeah, did you have a question right up there? That's okay. We'll come back. What did you have a question? Oh yeah, good question. Do penguins only eat krill? Do you all know what krill is? Krill? Yeah, what do you think? Exactly. It's like a little shrimp and they go around in big swarms in Antarctica. And the ones that I was talking about here, the chinstraps and the Adélies especially, in the summer, they do pretty much only eat krill. So 100% of their diet is Antarctic krill. The other penguins, they can eat fish and other things like that. And their diet is a little bit more flexible. All right, we'll take one or two more questions. Go ahead. Oh my gosh. What I have to think about that for a minute. What is the weirdest thing I've ever seen a penguin do? They are just, I don't know what goes through the mind of a penguin sometimes. I did see a penguin when I was in our field camp. We had a peak that was near our camp that was about 1,000 feet high. There was nothing on it. It was just rock and ice. So no reason for a penguin to be up there. One day I climbed the peak so that I could get a view out over the ocean and found a penguin on top that had somehow like waddled all the way up to this top of this mountain by itself. And he was just sitting up there looking around, admiring the view, just like I was, I guess. So I can't be too critical. But I mean, yeah, penguins are sometimes pretty unpredictable creatures. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, so when the juvenile penguins go in the water for the first time and they stay out for 2 years, do all these penguins do that, or is it just the chin straps? For the most part, that is true of not only penguins, but even many other seabirds in the Southern Ocean, even like the albatross that I showed. They can spend 5 or 6 years on the ocean without ever coming back to land. And you just, you have to twist your brain a little bit to think about these birds not as birds of the land, but as birds of the water. Penguins are supremely adapted for life in the ocean. That is their main home. That is where they live. They have sacrificed even the ability to fly so that they can swim better, and everything about their bodies and their behaviors and their whole life is so that they can spend time in the water. So when they come on land, that's where we see them. That's where they are at their most awkward. That's why they waddle side to side, because their feet are so short so that they can swim better. And that's why they stand upright, because they're so far back on their body so that they can be more hydrodynamic. And so all of these characteristics that we think are kind of cute are just so that they can exist better in the ocean. And so it maybe not should be so surprising to us that they spend so long at a time in the water, but that does mean that they should be able to do everything. So they can sleep while they're swimming. We don't really know how that works. Penguin sleep is a bizarre subject, but as far as I can tell, they are probably able to switch off half their brain and keep the other half awake and keep swimming and coming to the surface and breathing air. And then every so often flip and switch off the other half of their brain and swim with the other side. So they haven't really confirmed that yet. That is just what ornithologists think, but no one has yet been able to put an EEG device on the brain of a penguin and measure its brain waves to confirm that. Anyway, pretty crazy lifestyle to think about, just swimming around for years at a time. Yeah. Oh, did I ever eat a penguin? No, 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 I have never eaten a penguin. No, honestly, I have never eaten a penguin. I've never eaten seal either, but I have heard many accounts of how it tastes, especially after reading some of the historical accounts of people who are surviving on penguins and seals when they went down there 100 years ago. And seal evidently tastes pretty good. Penguin evidently does not taste very good. It tastes quite fishy. There was a study in the 1800s by an American ornithologist who ate like 150 different species of birds. And his conclusion from that study was that the birds that taste the best to us are the ones that eat grain and plant seeds, like ducks and chickens, freshwater ducks. And the ones that taste worse than that are the ones that eat meat. And then below that are the ones that eat fish, like penguins. And then the ones that taste the worst of all are the scavengers. The last one on his list was the turkey vulture. I can't believe he ate a turkey vulture, but in the name of science, I guess. So anyway, penguins are pretty low on that pecking order, and I don't think I would recommend eating one. Yeah. Oh, good question. Well, you may have heard terrible stories from the Arctic and up in Canada and far northern areas where there are so many mosquitoes and flies that they will suck liters of blood out of reindeer each day. And it's just almost unsurvivable for humans. Fortunately, Antarctica is too cold for mosquitoes or flies or actually any other insects. There's one tiny little bug that lives under rocks that you can look for if you're very motivated, called the Antarctic midge. But other than that, there's no bugs in Antarctica. So that is a great benefit of traveling there, is that you do not have to worry about mosquitoes or anything else like that that will suck your blood. Yeah, okay, last question. Ah, that's a good question. Why is Antarctica so cold? Well, there is a geological explanation, which is something like 30 million years ago, Antarctica detached from all the other continents. It used to be attached to Australia and South America. And when it did that, suddenly there was ocean all the way around its borders. So that meant that the wind could blow uninterrupted at the same latitude all the way around the world, just north of Antarctica. And that created an ocean current called the Antarctic Circumpolar Current that goes west to east. It's the largest ocean current in the world. It's like a river of ocean that's drifting continuously eastward all the way around the globe, just north of Antarctica. if you were to sit in a boat in that ocean, like between South America and the Antarctic Peninsula, you would drift at a rate of about 13 miles per day. So it's moving pretty fast, actually. And because of that current, it's kind of cut off from the rest of the world. And so the heat that the sun pours into the more tropical areas of the world can't penetrate through the ocean down to Antarctica. So Antarctica got sealed off from the warmer areas of the world and it cooled down. And that's when all these glaciers piled up, and it's been super, super cold ever since. And when that happened, probably most of the penguins that were surviving in Antarctica, that's when they left and went to all these other continents. And it was only the most extreme ones, like the emperor penguin and the Adélie penguin, that like to live in the snow and the ice, that stuck around. And those are the ones that you see in Antarctica today. With that, I would just like to thank you all for coming out here and listening to my penguin talk this afternoon. Thank you so much.